So I spend quite a lot of time in general practice talking to people about cracks in teeth that they might not always be aware of, and that might not be actively bothering the person, but frequently when we see a crack forming in a tooth, if we just allow that to go uncontrolled, the crack can propagate and spread through the tooth, and we can end up with a structure that either has a piece that breaks off, which may or may not be fixable, or we can end up with a crack that can split right the way through the floor of a tooth, and then it doesn't really matter what we do with that. We have little choice but to lose the tooth. This is because a crack that goes right the way through will create a bacterial channel that we cannot seal. So it doesn't matter if you do root canal or a crown or anything like that at that stage, you frequently are faced with not being able to save it. And this is why it's so important to try and identify any mechanical issues that could be overloading tooth structures. This can sometimes be clenching and grinding that people just aren't aware of, or habits that people might have, crunching ice cubes, having lots of nuts, that could potentially put teeth at risk. And sometimes this is why looking at things like protective guards, many different designs of these, at night time can be such an important thing to look at. Now, one of the biggest issues we see, or the teeth that are most vulnerable, are generally teeth with very large restorations in them. We're talking fillings, and generally these are teeth with amalgam fillings. The main reason for this is that amalgam doesn't bond to tooth structure in any way, so we end up with a tooth that has a kind of surrounding of enamel, and then maybe a big block of metal that's wedged in, and it's held in because it's wedged in place. This often means that the outer walls are a little bit undercut and a bit more likely to split under load. It's a testament to how strong enamel is that it takes so long to split, but if you put something under tension that's a little bit vulnerable for long enough, eventually off it's going to come. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking, if we just took the amalgam out and put a composite filling in, which is bonded to tooth structure, that the whole thing becomes stronger. But we've still got these kind of tension forces, and the bond to tooth structure is good, but it's not so strong that it's going to prevent an already weakened tooth from fracturing. So this is where we start to talk about restorations made of rigid materials like porcelain or zirconia that would maybe cover the full surface, the full biting surface of the tooth. It doesn't have to be a full-on crown, it can be an onlay which would cover that surface such that when the tooth is functioned on, we're no longer getting tensile forces splitting the tooth. We're getting a conversion to compression forces, which the tooth is much stronger against. So you don't always have issues when you've got these. I've got a couple of photos here of where I've seen people that have had a number of cracks in their teeth that they don't know about, and this is why I've taken the photos, so that I can show these people what I'm seeing. Very easy to sit on our ivory towers and say, you've got a crack in your tooth, you need a crown or you need an onlay. But if you're showing people, they'll see for themselves and they'll start counting all the cracks that you can see. So, as you can see here, this is a tooth with a really big metal filling in it and a number of cracks that are present. Now, this tooth definitely needs cuspal coverage to prevent it from fracturing further, and we're realistically talking about a crown or an onlay. The tooth in front, there's still a lot of sound structure, but there is evidence of a crack just at the back edge, and we can see one just starting at the front edge, although it's very difficult to make out. That might not be headed for an onlay right away, but certainly conversion to a bonded restoration here might be a little bit of a better option for that tooth. We look at another one. This is a really good example of a huge metal filling, and then the enamel around the outside just cracks and breaks off. And repairing this isn't always the most sensible, but we're sometimes left with a lot less tooth structure than we might like. Had this tooth had a crown or an onlay a very long time ago, it might have been in a much better situation. And then finally, this one's had a composite restoration placed in it. And often as dentists will think this is stronger because it's bonded, but look at the crack that's in the front of it. And then round the back, I believe when we prepped this there was a crack as well. So at the end of the day, we need to be looking at ways to protect these teeth a little bit better and making people aware of what we're seeing. You don't want to just leave teeth to crack and fracture, because at the end of the day we end up with a bit too much of a compromise and we just end up losing teeth. In a mouth that is already vulnerable, where there's maybe some heavy clenching and grinding going on that's resulted in the crack in the first place, if you're then distributing that force between fewer units, fewer teeth, these remaining teeth that could be vulnerable are a bit more likely to break, and all of a sudden you've got somebody who's got no back teeth because they've all fractured. So I hope this has been helpful, both for patients and colleagues. Always important to look at photos if we can, and really important to manage cracks and to manage forces and force distribution in the mouth. Thanks.